comments. Are you ready to get us off?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, can you all see my slides? Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I will be talking about my research, which is exploring prison pen pals and the value of correspondence from lay people. Today I will give some brief background into the research topic, the literature review. I will discuss my research questions, my proposed methodology, and end with my timeline and some final comments. I thought I'd start by sharing what led me to this topic. So I have an older brother who is incarcerated, and because of him, I have always wrote letters to people in prison. And when I was in undergraduate and college, the opportunity to start corresponding with people in American prisons presented itself, and I took it. 6 years later, I still write to a handful of those prisoners. And once I got started writing letters to people in prison, I discovered three things. And the first was that there was a number of pen pal websites which list prisoners' information, and anybody with internet access can visit these websites, and if they're interested, they can begin to correspond with people in prison. I also discovered that there was a handful of states that had introduced restrictions on prisoners' ability to seek pen pals or were considering restrictions on their ability to be listed on these websites, and departments of corrections were citing safety and manipulation as their reasons for doing so. And the final thing I discovered was that there was a lot of anecdotal evidence about people's pen pal experiences, but there was a lack of research on the topic. So some of the literature review that's been really instrumental into my thinking has been research on prison visits from community volunteers and befriending schemes here in the UK. So there are a handful of studies that have looked at prison visiting programs from community volunteers. And then here in the UK, there are befriending schemes which involve letter writing and visiting prisoners. And both of the literature suggests that there's a lot of benefits of having non-judgmental support that is not from family or friends. However, some of the studies are limited. So, for example, the prison visits from community volunteers literature, many of the volunteers tend to be clergy and from religious organizations. So, some of the researchers actually speculate that some of the positive outcomes of these programs are a result of the training that clergy receive, which makes them better equipped to help people during difficult life circumstances. And then the research into befriending schemes is very enlightening. It suggests that letter writing and visits from volunteers can help prisoners change their identity. It can boost hope and help them cope with life in prison. However, the research doesn't distinguish between letter writing and visits. Both of the services are looked as one. And this is despite the fact that prisoners tend to report that they value letters more than visits, which suggests that there's something to explore about correspondence. Additionally, the befriending schemes are dealing with different populations, so they're writing to British prisoners versus American prisoners. There is Lifelines, which writes to American death row prisoners, but pen paling, on the other hand, can include prisoners serving all lengths of sentences. And finally, the organizations tend to put limits on the relationship. So, for example, volunteers may not be able to disclose personal information, or they may have to use a pseudonym. And on pen paling websites, the only limitations are those set by the letter writers. There's also research into letters and letter writing in prison, and that research suggests that that letters are really an intimate space for reflection and relationship building. It also suggests that prisoners use letters as a way to maintain their identity, and this is achieved through role continuance. So, for example, through letters, prisoners can keep being fathers, they can act as counselors, they can act as friends, so they can enact roles that they would on the outside. And prisoners also use the visuality of letters to communicate a sense of identity. So the way that they display the letters in their cells is done so in a way to communicate that they have an outside identity that's separate from the institution. There's also research on pen pal profiles, and some of that research tells us what prisoners are looking for. So it suggests that prisoners are looking for friendship, romance, female companionship, non-judgmental support, and reentry support. But overall, none of this research actually tells us about letter writing relationships developed through pen pal websites or organizations. So to fill some of the gap in their research, I'm aiming to answer the following questions, and my research questions are: what is the role, function, and impact of correspondence in letter writers' lives? How do cognitive transformations and identity changes occur among letter writers through the correspondence? How do prisoners' pen pal relationships influence their incarceration experience and views about post-release outcomes? And how are relationships and the self constructed, maintained, and performed through correspondence? To answer these questions, I plan to employ a two-part study, and the first part is looking at the prisoner's perspective. So I will be using convenience sampling to get prisoners. And first, I decided to use the website writerprisoner.com to find participants. And I decided to go with this website because it lists the highest number of prisoners, it provides the most detailed information, and it claims to be the most visited out of all the pen pal websites. The website allows you to narrow down your search in multiple ways, and one of those ways is by state. So what I did was I compiled a list of all 50 states, and I determined or figured out how many prisoners are listed within each state. And that revealed that there are 5 states that have the highest amount of prisoners listed. The first state is actually Texas, but I decided not to go with Texas because Texas is one of the states where there are ongoing debates about prisoners' rights to be on these websites. So I decided to go with the second state, which is California. California is also my home state, so I'm pretty familiar with the way that California Department of Corrections operates. And California categorizes its 36 state prisons into 4 categories. And the first category is to serve female offenders, the second category to serve high security offenders, the third for general population, and the fourth are reception center and camps. So I ended up compiling a list of all the prisoners listed on Writer Prisoner from California, and there's about 1,600 prisoners. I determined what prisons they were in and selected the 4 prisons with the highest number of prisoners listed. Prisoners that are sampled in this way are going to get an invitation letter to participate in the research, and in the letter they're going to be informed that I'm looking for participants who meet 3 criteria. And the first is that they met their pen pal through a website or organization, and they didn't know this person before their incarceration. The second is that they've had a pen pal for at least 6 months, and this is to ensure that the relationship has been ongoing. And the third criteria is that they have at least 1 year left of their sentence, and that's to ensure that they'll meet the data collection period. The second part of the study involves getting the pen pal's perspective, so the letter writers on the outside. And for this part, I'll also be using convenience sampling. I will be asking prisoners to share information about the study and my contact information with their pen pals. And depending on the response rate, I may also ask Writer Prisoner to post an advertisement about the study on their Facebook page. Their Facebook page has over 89,000 likes, so this could be a pretty helpful way to get additional participants. For the data collection, both prisoners and pen pals are going to receive a survey with similar questions, but my primary data collection tool will be slightly different. So for prisoners, I plan to use correspondence as the primary data collection tool, and in a later slide, I'll discuss what the process will look like. And for pen pals, I plan to conduct semi-structured phone and video interviews. My data analysis will be thematic, informed by adaptive theory, and I'll use software such as NVivo or Atlas to conduct my data analysis. So I mentioned that I'm sampling from the website called Writer Prisoner. Just to give you an idea, this is what the profiles look like. So it includes a picture, it includes some background information about the prisoner, incarceration information, including their sentence length and what they're incarcerated for. It also includes a 250 word about me, which is either written by the prisoner or by their loved one who sets up their profile. And you can usually tell what way was done because of the use of the first or third person. And the profile will also include a physical address or an email address if that's an option available to them. In the survey, I'll be asking letter writers some background information about themselves, some questions regarding their letter writing practices, and some questions about their pen pal relationship. For prisoners, I mentioned correspondence is my primary data collection tool, and I plan to engage in correspondence with them for 6 to 9 months. So postage will be covered, and I have an American P.O. Box address here in the UK, so they'll be able to participate in the study at no additional cost to them. And I plan to exchange at least 5 letters with each participant, and each letter will serve a different purpose. So the first letter will be to invite prisoners to participate in the research. The second letter will be in response to their first letter and include research documents such as the information sheet, consent form, and survey. And the third letter will be a follow-up letter with the list of questions. Now, I don't want the list of questions to simply feel like, hey, here's a list of questions, answer them. Although in some ways that's what it is, but I do want it to feel like a dialogue, which is why I decided to actually engage in correspondence with them for a period of time. That way they can build trust and rapport and feel comfortable answering the questions to me. I know from my personal correspondence that prisoners can write really long letters, so I'm hoping to communicate to them that that's what I'm looking for in this study. The fourth letter I plan to use for clarification and follow-up questions. The fifth letter will mostly be final thoughts. And then later in the research process, I would like to send a sixth letter where I update them on my findings, share a draft of my writing, and ask if they have any final comments. So some of the questions that I will be asking prisoners about in the correspondence have to do with the content and tone of the letter, the nature and quality of the pen pal relationship, the role of the pen pal in their life, the role of letters in prisons, and some questions regarding identity and presentation of self. I imagine that the next 2 years will look something roughly like this. Most of my time will be spent for data collection, and I'm trying to account for time in the letters getting to the prisoners, them being able to read it, write it, respond, send it over. So 6 to 9 months will be for letters. Somewhere during that time, I also plan to interview their pen pals, and later in the research process, do my coding, transcription, and write-up. Some final comments. I'm still trying to determine what a good sample size would be. Some of the research using correspondence methods suggests that it could produce higher response rates. So again, trying to figure out what a good number is. I'm also trying to figure out the amount of disclosure. I do want to keep that research participant relationship, but I'm also trying to account for the fact that I won't be physically present. So I do want to communicate some sense of my personality to them. And then finally, I'm still working on the interview schedule for pen pals. I'm considering waiting until I receive responses from the prisoners so I can draft better questions. But I welcome any feedback and questions. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for excellent presentation. Okay, so any questions, comments? Yes, Dan?
Sorry, that was a mistake. I was trying to get rid of my hand clap.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions? Yes, Lauren.
Yeah, just to say well done, Tanya. That was very clear and concise. You've packed a lot of information into the presentation, which is great. I know that in terms of the range of prisons, you're thinking about gender differences, but I just wondered whether the literature so far suggests that there might be gender differences in the relational dimensions of letter writing.
So the research on Newbridge evaluations, they don't say how many male or female participants are within the study. Mabin's research, which is looking at lifelines, there was one participant that wrote to a female death row prisoner, and she didn't describe the relationship as intimate as volunteers that had male correspondents did. But aside from that one person, it's really unclear. I should say that there are significantly less women listed on Writer Prisoner than men. For instance, out of the 4 prisons I picked, the highest with the men has 250, and women there's only 36. So I think it could say that maybe there's something exploring as to why there's less female listed on these websites.
I was going to say, what would your speculation be? Because it obviously has an impact on the nature of your study.
Yeah, I do think that there will be differences, and I say that my husband wrote to a female correspondent, and based on what I read, the relationship and conversation seemed different than perhaps I should say Newbridge volunteers and Lifelines volunteers all tend to be women too. So this idea of role continuance also applies to female letter writers, but I'm unclear about the female prisoner perspective.
Could it be related to levels of literacy?
I'm not sure, perhaps. That's a good point.
Yes, Kali?
Hi, Tanya. That was a brilliant presentation. I just had one question that, you're using correspondence as a method to communicate with the prisoners. But do you think, because you're not physically present and conducting interviews, the responses might be rehearsed and, it might not yield the same kind of accuracy as the other methods of communication would? I mean, I'm just thinking out of the methodological point of view.
Yeah, so I don't know if the questions or responses would be rehearsed. I'm not quite sure how much they have reflected on the questions that I will be asking. In terms of accuracy, there's only there's probably like less than 20 researchers that have used correspondence for qualitative research. And most of them tend to suggest that they felt the accounts were richer, deeper, that because there was more flexibility in when participants could address the questions and where they responded, that maybe it was giving them more space for reflection, and that's why they were getting these richer accounts. But there's such little literature on this method that it's almost hard to say.
Thank you.
I mean, you've done about 6 correspondence or so letters, right? I'm just wondering how regularly do you get these letters? How long does it take for a letter to be received and replied to?
I receive a response from the US to the UK in a week to a week and a half. So that's why I was saying the 6 to 9 months is accounting for some of the time lags, and also accounting for the institution reviewing the mail. In California, correctional officers are legally required to hand over correspondence within 10 days. So hopefully there's not much of a time lag within that frame.
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking of documenting how maybe the pandemic has affected the pen-pal relationship and how it has maybe, changed, with the pandemic being in place now? Has the pen-pal relationship been more strong because now people are relying more on pen pals rather than physical meetings? Are you exploring that kind of angle too?
I'm not, but that's a great question, especially because during lockdown, it does seem like more people started writing letters to prisoners. there was a TikTok viral trend, and it made even the Writer Prisoner website crash. So it could even be that either the relationship didn't change, or prisoners who otherwise didn't receive correspondence maybe started receiving correspondence because people were experiencing these feelings of lockdown across the world.
Might it matter if, sorry for turning off my video, might it matter that, say, the letters could be written by someone else rather than the prisoner or the prisoners themselves? So some people might not be literate themselves, but get someone to write these for them. Would that be an issue for you, or it doesn't really matter?
The research on Lifelines, which was prisoners with pen pals, the researcher said that there was a range of literacy rates. But then there is research by Straub, for example, that says when prisoners can't write, that it's almost like a favor that's within prison to have somebody. And I think if it were to come down to that, it would signal their desire to really answer these questions. I don't think it would skew the data so much.
All right, thanks. Any more questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.